Welcome to Windows on the World. Join us live every Sunday, 8 p.m. UK time, windowsontheworld.net, and do check out the archive and program stream on the website. I have done many interviews over the years with Stephen and Evan Strong, a father and son team from New South Wales in Australia, from finding anomalous artifacts to ancient civilizations to a through line of history which is way outside the accepted narrative. They have been at the forefront of many discoveries. And this show is very special. We're going to be talking about previous civilizations and some very anomalous artifacts indeed. 3 rings which have come into the possession of Stephen and Evan through their contact Ros. 2 were found in Angkor Wat. 1 is actually from Scotland. And this is the story of these 3 rings and a lot more. And it's always fascinating talking to Stephen and Evan. And I hope you enjoy this because you will not find information like this anywhere else. So do remember to check out their website, forgottenorigin.com. Hi, welcome to this special from Windows on the World. Today I'm going to be talking to Stephen Strong. Evan's not with us because he's had some dentistry, but we're going to get into some new findings and the bigger picture as usual. So welcome back, Stephen.
Pleasure to be back as always, mate. I've enjoyed it. We've done it many times before and I always look forward to it. Yeah, it's an interesting, inconvenient set of discoveries we've been making for quite some time. Metal that shouldn't be here. Yeah, that's a good way to start because it actually relates to the fact we were talking just before we started about the 4.5 hour epic with Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock and some other gentleman, forgotten his name now. And this guy kept saying to Graham, "Where's your proof? Where's your proof?" And the issue is here, there is plenty of proof, and there are quite a few pieces of metal that have been found that break every rule. And the ones that come to mind, there's one that starts that was found by an original elder by the name of Arnie Mini Mace. And I might tell you the story about that because it is a fascinating story. She was at the carry-on glyphs, the glyphs that I've spoken about before. Where they've got
For people who don't know, Stephen, I'll just explain that because we have quite a lot of people in the UK and they might not know about the carry-on glyphs are in New South Wales, and they have these hieroglyphs carved into them, which the debunking story is more ridiculous than the idea that they were there in the first place, which is not ridiculous in a way, is it? Because we've talked about it over the years.
Yeah, it's around 300 odd glyphs that have been carved into 3 walls. And by the way, quite recently, the government decided to protect the glyphs. They went there and they blew up part of it. And then they threw all this stuff inside the walls and they actually covered some of the glyphs completely. They're gone and really made a big mess of it. But what was interesting is when they did blow it up, and they did, they said they were fixing it to make it safer. And I remember when Jake Cassar went in and said it's 1,000,000 times more dangerous than it's ever been before. What was interesting is they've only done it for 1 day. Because what happened is while they were blowing up, one of the guys there, and nobody knows what happened, severed an artery. And they had to bring in a Westpac helicopter and fly him to a hospital immediately. And they've never come back since. Fascinating story. But that aside, let me tell you a story about this elder, Arnie Mini Mace. She went to the glyphs, I think, about 25 years ago. And her story is, and I don't doubt it for a sec, she's a highly respected elder. While she was there, she said the spirits told her to pick up 2 pieces of dirt. And she did. And she took them home. And they were between the walls. And lo and behold, when she got home, she decided to clean up the dirt. She was told to clean the dirt up. And according to her, it took a half an hour of carefully scraping away the dirt. And lo and behold, right in the center of it was a piece of metal, a flat piece of metal. And by the way, our critics have said it's a melted Coke can, but we'll get back to that in a sec because we had it analyzed. Anyway, she had it for quite some time. And when we visited her, she gave me the piece of metal and another thing, which is a piece of bone, and I'll talk about that too. And she said, "You need this for protection because you're going to be attacked." Well, she got that part right. We have been often. And we've had death curse, and we've had curses actually where people have rung up and said they're going to kill us. All that sort of stuff's happened a lot. But to cut a long story short, I play tennis up this way here, and I play tennis with a gentleman who runs the laboratory in a university, Southern Cross University, and he is he runs the actual laboratory, and there are 138 scientists there, which makes it the largest laboratory in Australia. And the reason I'm telling you this is because this scientist isn't someone that's just working in the street somewhere. He runs the whole thing. And he looked at this piece of metal we had. And unfortunately, because Evan's not with us, he can't put it up right now. But trust me, it's there, and you can see it in our articles. And he said to me, I'd love to have that analysed. He said, but to do that, I'm going to need to cut a bit because I feel there's something about the metal there that just isn't right. I said, well, even though Auntie Minnie's given it to me to look after, and I've since given it back to her, I said, I've got to get her permission. Anyway, I contacted her and she said, yeah, let's do it. It'll be a small chip. It's okay. So he did. He did. And what did he find? Well, remember number one, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about Australia. And the story is that a group of Africans turned up here about 60,000 years ago, and there was no one in, no one out until Cook. Okay, that's the story. And then after Philip came, then some metal turned up then. But before, there's none. Lo and behold, this was metal. So it didn't make a lot of sense. But people tried to tell us, oh, it's just something recent. Well, I can tell you now, I'll tell you what he told us about this metal. He said to us, first of all, when we tried to cut it, because it looked like aluminium, and that's why people said it's a Coke can, we used what we thought would cut it, but it wouldn't. And we went through 3 drill bits before we found something that would cut it. It's the hardest drill bit we have. It's got a diamond tip. I'm not sure exactly what it is because I'm not up to that. And he said, you're not going to believe what we got. I said, when I've got the readout, and it came out like this. 73% aluminium, 3% copper, and 24%, how do you put it to me? It's not on the periodic table. Now, people might think, oh, well, it's just some sort of rogue piece of metal that we haven't found yet. But hang on for a sec. He then told me, he said, if you could remake that, you would become a billionaire. And of course, I said, well, hang on for a sec. What are you talking about here? He said, that metal, that aluminium, is the hardest metal we've ever analyzed. It's much harder, like I'm going to talk about titanium because that's in one of the other ones there. He said it's a much harder than titanium or chromium, which are the 2 hardest ones that make metal much harder. He said, we don't know what it is, but he said, but if you can tell us what it is and you know where it is, you will make billions of dollars. And he said, what we can tell us is that 24% is not on this planet. Now, being a scientist with 138 people working above, I know what he was hinting at, but he can't say the next word. He can't say it's from somewhere else. He's not allowed to. But we did some research, and there was another issue about this that's quite fascinating. Somebody did say, oh, it's something recent someone's made. And I'm thinking, mate, if they've made it, you really don't think that it wouldn't be out in the mainstream by now and they'd be making money out? If they've made something like this and they are a chemist of high order, they would be aware of the fact, like this guy was, how important it was. Now, the trick is, I'm not that familiar with aluminium alloys, but I did some research on that. Well, actually, Evan did. I don't go near the computer. We found something out. Today, the alloys that have copper, 3%, and the aluminium, they don't use 3% now. They use 10 to 12%. And you can get a signature and a date to this. And you have to go back past 3,000 years where they used aluminium and copper between 2 and 4%. And this is 3. So that gives it a minimum date of 3,000 years ago. Now, what's it doing in Australia? But having said that, even those alloys don't have the 24%, which is basically 1/4 of the whole thing, that doesn't register on the periodic table. And that doesn't fit into any traditional narrative. And it certainly does fit into the narrative that Graham Hancock was trying to talk about, you've spoken about, and we've all spoken about the fact that there were previous civilizations. But what it tells me, Mark, straight away, is these previous civilizations were making a metal that we can't make today, that is more powerful and stronger than any metal on the planet now. So that starts a series of discoveries that have turned up with us that throw out and would actually really that discussion that went on for 4.5 hours with Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock, and someone called Dibble. I do remember his last name, and I did once call it Dribble. I'm trying not to. It's Dibble. He kept saying, where's the proof? Where's the proof? Well, there's the first piece of proof, and it's fairly strong proof. Now, what I can also tell you is that the 24% is impressive, but we have another ring that is nearly double that. It's 41.8%. And the story with this particular piece of metal, now this one, we've got another one I'm going to talk about that's found in Australia. And we found that one I've just spoken about that was found, the other one's found in Hill End, which is also in New South Wales. And what's interesting about this is the ring I'm going to talk about after this one is found in Hill End. The first one is found in Carryong. And do you know what they share, Ma? They're on exactly the same latitude. Do you know what the latitude is?
33 degrees.
Yeah. That's the Masons are keen on that number, aren't they?
They got it from somewhere because they just copied a load of stuff. Yeah.
And isn't it interesting that both these, I'm going to talk about 3 of these things. There's 4 actually. 2 of these things were both found on that particular latitude. Coincidence? Maybe. But let's talk about the second one before we get to that one. The second one, I think, is the most important ring that's been found on this planet. Because it basically, not only does it have elements that are not on this planet, the elements that are shouldn't be there. It's impossible for them, well, according to their narrative, it can only be the outcome of a sophisticated chemist that knew basically the story about all metals on this planet and knew them in a way that only today we come close to. Now, this particular ring was found in Angkor Wat. In fact, I'm going to hold up another one right now, this one here at the moment. It was found next to this one, and I'll talk about that one further on in the piece. Now, this particular ring, our friend Ros Mulder bought both of these, and the person who sold them has now disappeared. There's a funny story about that one, but we won't do that today. I think something's happened to this person for sure, because they had a cache of these things, and Ros bought 3 of them, and now I don't know what's happened there, but we won't go down that path because I don't think it's good. Anyway, we got this one analyzed, and we have 2 ways of analyzing. One is our chemist friend, but we also have a friend that has an electronic machine that I think costs about, I think it's in the high 5 figures, nearly 6 figures. There's only 2 in Australia. And what you do is you put it underneath there for about 9 or 10 seconds. This one was analyzed there too. And it gives you a complete readout of everything that's there. Now, this ring had platinum, rhodium, rhodanium, cadmium, gallium, and another IUM that skips my mind at the moment, but believe me, there were 6. And we did some research on that, and every one of these IUMs was discovered since 1802. And that's an issue because we're talking about these rings that were found, not found, they were taken out by a metal detector when the Americans helped Cambodia and bombed it into the Stone Age. And they went through Angkor Wat and they found this ring and the other one, and then he sold it to someone, and that's how we got it, okay? This particular ring had all the elements together added up to 58.2%, which means 41.2% wasn't there again. Not 24% now, 41.2%. Now, that's interesting in itself. And what happened was the ring has been broken 3 times. You breathe on the damn thing and it breaks. It's so fragile. In fact, it is actually called the ring that David, Evan, and my wife broke. And they've all broken it at different times. And luckily, on one occasion, we've got pictures of that too. But again, because Evan's crook, you're going to have to take my word for this. What I found was all those IUMs were a coat, and inside was actually a piece of steel that was separate. And it was half, I think it was about 40.8% iron and 41.8% this other thing. Now, that 41.8%, I've got a question there because we don't make that today again. We've got another one of those things we don't do, but this is the important part. The third element, which was 6.89%, was gallium. Now, there are very few people who are aware of the element of gallium, and you may know about it, Mark. I'm not sure, but I didn't. I'm going to be honest. I had no idea what it was, but I looked it up. And this is interesting. Gallium is a fairly recent metal, and the reason is you've got to melt steel or aluminium at 3,000 to 4,000 degrees Celsius, and then you get a byproduct. You can't dig it out of the ground and put it in. So anyone that says, oh, they dug it from somewhere, impossible. You got to cook it. So what we're saying is at the moment, we've got an Angkor Wat. At some stage, they had an oven that could reach 3,000 degrees Celsius. Well, I'm going to tell you now, our traditional narratives don't have that story in Angkor Wat. But what's fascinating about that is when you do melt that, you get 0.1, 0.2%. This is 6.89%. And then I went through the other ones that were there, and some of them were discovered in 1932, 1888. And I'm thinking, hang on for a sec, this is all recent stuff. And they're used for solar panels, for electrodes, all this sort of stuff, not for rings. So we had an interesting story with that one. And the gallium itself at 6.89%, that is high-level technology. And when Mr. Dibble tells us that we came from Stone Age, we came out, you know the story, we walked out of caves dribbling. Then we had stones, and about 6,000, 5,000 years ago, we started to make farms, and then we started doing technology quite recently. No, this is in Angkor Wat, ladies and gentlemen, and it doesn't make any sense. And I started to look at these rings, and as you know, we've got quite a few of them, and I started to see a pattern. And the pattern continues, and I'll refer to a couple of other rings, and this one I'm holding up now. I'll need to explain the story with this particular ring. And as you can see, Mark, it's a ring, but I can put two fingers in there and I've got room for another one. It's not a ring for my finger. It's a ring for someone, I believe, in an earlier time that may have been slightly taller than me and might have had thicker fingers and thicker everything. Now, this particular ring, there are two of them. And this lady I spoke about before, Roz, the one who bought these rings, she bought one like this one, okay? And the one that she has two elephants, which I'm holding up now, and it has two monkeys. And can you see both of those? Mine's got the two elephants, the two monkeys, and the two pigs. Now, what I want to tell people, you may not be able to see that now. You might just see it with the two trunks. Each of those faces are not the same. I believe there's a male and female of each. This is a very unique sort of ring. Now, what happened was and I'm going to tell you the story first, which goes into the esoteric first, then we'll go back to the scientific. She had this ring in her hand one night, and she told me she was watching a reality show on TV. And she said, because it turns my mind off completely because it's pure stupidity, which all reality shows are. And she said this. She said the ring, and I know this might sound a bit bizarre, but wait until you hear the end of it, told her to turn off the reality show, which I'm thinking, well done, ring.
That's good advice, yeah.
It won't do you any good. It only makes you stupid. She turned it off, and then she was told to go to the computer, which she did. And this is what she was told to do. She was told to type in the address, and I remembered exactly what Roz told me, of a Thai arts and crafts shop. Now, Roz goes to archaeological sites to buy things. She goes to Vietnam stuff to buy things, but she doesn't go to art and craft shops, and she didn't know. She was given, and this is where it sounds bizarre, the address the computer address of this arts and crafts shop. I know that sounds weird, but this is what happened. So she types that in, and she said to the ring, well, what do I do now? She said, type in Giant's Ring. And she did. And guess what came up? This. And then that ring told her to send that ring to me, not to her. She wasn't allowed to touch it or go near it. So that's how that ring turned up. Now, what's interesting, the reason I wanted to tell you about these two rings is now let's do the science of the ring that directed her. And it looks exactly the same as this. Now, all of these rings, the rings from Lemuria and the rings from Atlantis, have within them what's called orichalcum, which is what Plato spoke about, what Pliny the Elder spoke about, what Homer spoke about when he wrote a poem where he dedicated orichalcum to Aphrodite. And they told us there were 5 elements in it, which is copper, zinc, iron, lead, and nickel. Okay, all of them have that. Okay, but this is what's interesting. The ones from Atlantis, we've got 3 of those, are all 99.5% copper and zinc, and they're little drops of those other 3. With the ones from Angkor Wat, which we think are from Lemuria, and the ones in Australia, it's different. They still have the 5 elements, but they're differently made up, and all of the ones from Lemuria have tin. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This particular ring and the next one up both have 1.12% tin, exactly the same. Now, the ring that Roz sent me, the one that directed that, it had the lead in there. They all have lead. And the lead on that one was 8.26%. Now, what lead does to any metal alloy is it'll weaken it. So you know what the chemists put in there, Mark? Titanium. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not aware of titanium, it is considered the hardest metal hardener in the world. But what's fascinating about this is it was first used for 24 karat gold to harden it. Otherwise, it's too soft. It was not used industrially before that, but it's inside a ring from Angkor Wat. Now, how did the titanium get there? And here's the important part. How did the metallurgist understand that because these lead was so high, because normally with the Atlantean rings, it's about, in fact, with the Atlantean rings, it's always 0.28 or 0.27%. Notice that repetition each time. Well, this one, 8.28% is way big. So they put titanium in. And I thought of that, and I researched the titanium, thinking, hang on for a sec, what's that doing at Angkor Wat? How did they have titanium, and how did somebody playing around with these metals understand that? Now, further on, there's another ring there, another one that Roz has got, where the copper and zinc, yeah, it adds up to about 95%, but the zinc is about 38%, which weakens the structure. And guess what they put in this time? Not titanium, they've already used that once, they put in chromium, which is another metal hardener. And what we're starting to see, and we have this evidence, it's hard and fast, scientifically analysed. What we're seeing when you look and put these rings together is I've got a chemist here that is unlike any chemist I've seen that's supposed to be around at that time, who understands the capacity of titanium, he understands the capacities of chromium, and makes metals, makes objects sometimes that don't exist here today. And you've got to ask yourself, what's going on there? And of course, the other ring I want to talk about, the one that was found at Hill End, it's got the orichalcum, and it's also got the same symbols as the first Atlantean ring, which is 4 symbols that represent the Berber motif for Atlas. And they have 5 circles of different size, which I believe are the 5 rings in the middle of Atlantis. And what's interesting is with the third ring, instead of having the lead, which is around 2.28%, on that one, it's got 0.28% missing. That's the third time, missing again. So what am I getting there? I'm getting a pattern which I'm finding time after time after time, 3 times, where in 3 different scientific analyses, we have rings that have within them, whether it's 0.28%, whether it's 24%, whether it's 41.8%, a metal that is not on this planet. So what we have, and if Graham Hancock knew and had that information, when this guy, Mr. Dibble, kept saying, "Where's your proof?" he could have said, "I've got 3. Tell me how this happened." And then throw in the titanium, which is 4. Then throw in the chromium, which is 5. Now you've got 5 different pieces of evidence, of which 3 are found in Australia and 2 are found in Angkor Wat. So it's not in one place, is it? It's spread all over the place, that have either metals that don't exist on this planet, or the use of metals that we did not use until very recent times during the Industrial Revolution, in some cases until last century. And when you put that together, you have a story that breaks all of the narratives that we have that tell us we came out of the caves and now we're at the peak of our civilization. What I'm prepared to say is, from what I can see from a scientific viewpoint, no, there were earlier civilizations that were using metals that have an incredible capacity to make things so hard that we can't come close today. Whatever the titanium, which is the one we understand, it's nothing compared to that thing that's been put inside the aluminium. So, in combination, and there are quite a few other objects in this group we've got. In fact, we have 3 rings from Atlantis, 9 from Lemuria, all made with exactly the same 5 components. All of those rings have the same 5 components, but the Lemurian ones always have tin. And even with the tin, how can you get exactly down to 2 decimal points the same amount of tin in 2 different rings? How does that happen? What sort of chemist, or should I say alchemist, can do that? And the answer is, we don't have them today, Mark, but they were on this planet. So
I think that's the whole idea of alchemy, wasn't it? It was striving for something that we actually didn't know about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've got to make the point. The reason why I'm using the word alchemist as opposed to a chemist is because I know that with both sets of rings, they have other powers and capacities, mystical powers that break every rule I know of, and particularly the Atlantean rings, because I'm going to be very honest, we had 3, I now have 1. I've had to destroy 2 of them. Reluctantly, the second one I destroyed, not so much the first one, because they were too dangerous.
You don't have to share that with us if you don't want to, Stephen, but could you give us some idea of what you mean?
Yeah, I will. Oh man, we have had. The story I've been given is this. We all know that Atlantis was a high-level high-level technology civilization that fell on its own sword. And I do know that those 3 rings, and yes, when I talk about 3 rings, we have this in the background. I can hear people saying, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Well, actually, you're right. Remember, Tolkien's story is not a story. It's based on a myth. And the myth is very dominant in Scandinavian countries. And guess what? Tolkien was a linguist. He wasn't a novelist. He worked at Cambridge University, specialized in the languages of Scandinavia. And he wrote this story for his kids, yeah, but it was based on a myth, and myths are based on fact. So the rings from Atlantis, we now know, were instrumental in destroying the planet. And this is what I find interesting. These 3 rings, the 2 that were found in Australia, 2 of the 3 were found in Australia. One was found with a metal detector at Hill End, 33 degrees, about 4 years ago. 1.5 meters beneath the surface, dug out. The second one was found in Hill End, 33 degrees again. There's a pattern going on here, ladies and gentlemen. And it was found 4.5 meters beneath the surface. That's about 15, 16 feet down. That's not, I dropped it and the dirt got on top. That's buried.
So that would indicate that it's been there a very, very long time.
Oh, it's been there a long time. And they were both put in the same place. And you know why they were put there in the gold field? Because Hill End is a gold field. The center of those 5 rings, there's the temple of Cleito and Poseidon. Cleito was a white magician woman. Poseidon married. The story is Poseidon slept with every woman on the planet, but he married that woman. And that temple in the center is lined solely with orichalcum, and then it has a gold cap on the top. So if you're going to bury an orichalcum ring, where should you bury it? Where there's gold. And that's why they were found there. Now, those rings, let's talk about, and the third ring, the other ring, was found in the far reaches of Scotland. And it was found in where a church is. And as you know, most churches...
So, do you know where in Scotland?
I don't, but I could ask Roz and she would know.
Do try and find out from Roz. That would be very interesting to me, Stephen.
I'll find that out. Next time we talk, I'll have that for you, okay?
Right.
Now, I want you to think about something. Atlantis, and by the way, there's a place called the Atlantic Ocean. I wonder how it got that name. But anyway, we'll leave that aside for a second. But my thinking is, if you're going to bury these rings and Atlantis has fallen apart and these rings caused it, you would go to the far ends of the earth. And if you're going to go to the south, as far as you can go from there would be Australia. And if you're going to go to the north, if you want to go up that way, once you get to Scotland, there's not much left after that. You've basically hit in the Arctic Circle there. Now, they were buried there deliberately because they were so powerful. Now, how do I know that? Well, I'll give you an example of what happened with one of those rings. Okay, when we had Atlantis ring number 1, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you can go to our website and there's plenty of articles and you'll see pictures of it. Like I said, it has the 4 markings of Atlas and the 5 markings of Atlantis with the rings, with the round circles there. So what happened was, on one occasion, when I first had this ring and didn't really know much about it, I made the mistake of wearing them a lot. And we'll talk about that later, Mark, and that was a really bad mistake. Tolkien was right about the fact when you wear those rings, they do affect you. And I decided, I knew, because I've got to tell you, ring number 1 and 2, 1 and 3 were both cut. And you pick and see the pictures, they were cut and then resealed. We believe those 2 rings were meant for good purposes and they were cut. And once they were cut, they went down a completely different evil path. And anyone that wears them, they get affected by it. Now, what I said on this day, I was trying to clean that ring. I was trying to clean another ring too, and you can't do it. They're beyond hope, okay? You got to remember, these rings were there at the very finish of Atlantis when it really was, and they created the evil. They have been so tainted, there's nothing that could be done.
What's your timeline on that, Stephen? What would you say that the timeline of the
I'd go along with Graham
Atlantis
Hancock
was
on this. I'm going to say that I think Atlantis was wiped out during the Younger Dryas, and that's why I think that's what caused the Younger Dryas, Atlantis blowing up. And I think that was a cataclysm that went around the planet, particularly if you look at the main area of influence, it's around Europe and America and in the Atlantic Ocean. The impact when you go to Australia and further around there is not as bad.
That ties in perfectly with the William Cummins Beaumont theory as well.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure Hancock has looked at, but it does tie an awful lot together.
It does.
And again, it's like a Slater in a way. It's like a Frederick Slater in a way. He was completely derided once he came out with this stuff. But once you look at it, it starts to make sense. When you look at the official timeline, it doesn't make sense. So
no, it doesn't.
We have to draw our own conclusions.
Remember, if it was a comet like as bad as it was, why was it so centered around America and Europe and didn't go like all the other ones when they've hit that wiped out the whole place and all sorts of things? I don't believe. And then the point is, where's the impact point? They haven't found that. Okay, so I believe this was Atlantis going down around 12,000 years. Now, what then happened was with this particular ring, we took it to Carrion, to the glyphs we spoke about earlier, right? And I knew that there were women that were doing some ceremonies on the women's healing table there, which has very mystical powers, and every woman is laid on it. Will verify. I don't listen to their stories anymore because I don't want to hear them because it's women's business, but it has an impact. And I asked this woman, and I shouldn't have, it was my mistake, I actually asked Roz to do it, and she gave it to this woman. This woman has got all these notes on Atlantis, and she believed she was a priestess there. And I just said, yeah, whatever. I'm not going to make a comment any
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around, and we have to take that with a big pinch of salt. I mean, usually hits women of middle age as well.
Yeah, I've met so many goddesses.
There's a lot of them in a place in England called Glastonbury, and they've completely ruined the whole atmosphere of it by becoming what they are. You know, I think it's destroyed any real magic there, personally.
Anyway, what happened was she took the ring off. I said, look, give it a ceremony on this very sacred women's site, because I figured that might clean the ring up a bit. I think the logic was good, but it wasn't. What happened was this woman took the ring off Roz and laid it down on the table and put it on a finger, and I did not give her permission to do that. I did not give her permission to put it on ring on anyone. It'll kill you. And I'll give you an example of what happened to my wife when she actually touched one of these rings. Anyway, she did it. And then when she lay down and put it on her finger, there was about 10 women there, and they told me about this later, but they didn't tell me at the time, I can tell you. And she started screaming and making this guttural sound, and then said, the ring has told me that Steve can't have the ring anymore. And she told the women on the way back, we're going to lie to him, and I'm going to steal the ring off him. Now, what's interesting is none of those women, and they're all shocked by it, none of those women told me until later. And I know what happened. They were all taken over by this ring. The side of it that's malevolent, the dark energy within it, had taken over every one of them, including
I think that's a problem, Stephen, with people who get carried away with things. Yes. That they don't actually understand what they're messing around with, because these things, like the whole idea of psychometry, is quite an old thing, and objects do infuse energies.
They do.
And if that sounds esoteric to some people, you can look it up. I mean, parapsychology has been looking at this for over 100 years, and there's many examples of it. And I've had personal experiences with what you're talking about as well,
right?
With an object that caused absolute havoc.
Well, this one did a lot more than that, believe me.
Right, yes.
It's starting now. So what happens is we get back to the, I had gone somewhere else, and I took some people somewhere else. We met at the car park at Carry On there, where everyone parks their cars before they go there. And she come up to me because I said, I'll have the ring back, please. And she said, no. The ring has told me that it wants me to do another ceremony. I said, oh, I don't know about that, because I knew what this ring was like. I knew it was bad. And then all of a sudden she started screaming at me, and then her partner joined in, and then someone else joined in. And then this other guy I knew, he got down on his hands and knees literally and begged me and said, let her do one more ceremony with it, please. And I said, well, hang on for a sec. I don't think she should. And I didn't know at the time that this had happened, that this woman was going to tell lies, and I told them all that. She said, no, I've got to do it. And after a while, they badgered me. I said, well, look, okay, this is what's going to happen. I've got to go back up to where I live, which is 1,000 k's from there. I said, I'll come back down in a couple of weeks after you've done that one more ceremony, and I'll take it back. Oh, great, fantastic. And I really was looking at these people. I thought, my God, what's going on? They're screaming and yelling, and it was really very aggressive. Anyway, we're driving back in the car, and she's sitting in the back seat. And I said to her, look, I'll be back in a couple of weeks, and after you finish your ceremony, I'll take the ring back there, but be very careful with it. And I looked in the back seat. I looked it through the rear vision mirror, and she had the ring, and she was doing this with it. And my God, she said, oh, the ring will decide that. And fair income, I had this vision of Gollum, because she was a very thin woman. And I thought, oh, my God, she looks like Gollum. Oh, my God, what's going on here? We're doing Lord of the Rings, but Gandalf's not around, and Ian McLean and all those people aren't there. And she said, the ring will decide. Okay, she did that ceremony, and I heard about it, and everyone there did projectile vomiting. Everyone was screaming agony. She said, this is good. And I then said, I'm coming back to get the ring. She said, no, you're not. The ring has decided it's staying with me. And I sort of figured that when I watched her in the back seat there. And I said, yes. You don't own it. Roz bought it. You can't have that ring like that. It's not going to happen. Well, this is where it gets interesting. She then put up on the website, by the way, we've seen it, and it was taken to the police, because it did get to the police, by the way, that she was going to kill us, Evan and I. And she announced the time she was going to kill us, and she was going to use the ring to kill us.
So she put this on a website?
Dead set. And she told everyone, I'm not lying about this, because when the ring takes over people, and it does, they don't think anymore. They are completely in control.
Possessed.
You mentioned that before. Their mind is gone. They've been taken over. And she was convinced that she was a priestess that used to have this ring, and therefore she should have it back. And she made the announcement, and Evan's not here at the moment, but he backed me up on all this because we went through this. I had elders from all over the country ringing me and saying, someone's going to kill you. I said, yeah, we know about it. And I had elders that gave me mantras to chant, and that includes Kano, my boss elder, and others. They all knew about it. And we had people ringing up telling us, it's up on the website, read it. And we read it. She put it up. She said she's going to kill both of us, and the ring wants us both dead. And we knew what time it was going to be. So what I did is that night, Evan salted everything. He smoked everything. We had these mantras we were doing. I put out all my rocks. As you know, we've got all these sacred rocks. I put out a ring for protection. And I'm going to give an example of what happened that night. Evan went to bed in this, just here behind me in that bed I'm pointing at now. And he went to bed in the middle of winter, right? Now, we live in a rainforest here. And you guys probably aren't familiar with the fact we've got ticks here that have a poison. And they can kill some people. They're called shellbacks, and they're quite big. And they run around here in the summer. But in the winter, they hibernate, right? Now, Evan is allergic to the tick. If he gets one tick bite, it can nearly kill him. He went to bed that night in that bed I'm pointing at now, and he woke up in the morning. He had 41 ticks. He didn't go anywhere that night. He stayed in here. He didn't go outside. It was the middle of winter. He had 41 ticks, and he came so close to dying, it wasn't funny. Mine was different. I was doing these chants all night long, and I could feel this energy trying to kill me. And there was on one occasion there where I thought, no, I'm gone. It's going to kill me. We got through that night, okay? And we got through that night the next day. And then what happened was one of the people that worked with us, they found out about that. They went down to her house. And I know this lady quite well. And I wouldn't pick her in a fight, mate. That's all I'm going to say about this woman. And she came to the door where she was. Oh, this is what happened. Roz actually went to the police and showed them a receipt for the ring that she'd bought. And she said, I want it back. And they said, yeah, you own it. You've got to get it back. They said, what you do first is you demand it gets sent back to you. And if not, we'll go around and get it off her. Okay. So she got told that, and she sent us a box. And I went to the post office and I opened it up, and guess what was in there? Nothing. And she said, oh, it must have fallen out in the post. I thought, oh, great. Here we go. And I thought, this is going to be interesting. So this other woman we know then went around and saw her and said, I'm not leaving this place until you give the ring back. She said, I haven't got it. She said, well, if you don't find it in 5 minutes, you won't get up again. I'll smash you into a pole. And then she found the ring and gave it to him. Anyway, it came back to me. And that ring was, because she'd done 2 ceremonies with it, was beyond hope. It was now purely evil. There was nothing we could do with that ring.
When you got this ring, Stephen, it was kind of benign. Is that what you're saying? Or did you always have some
No, it wasn't benign.
About it? No,
it was never benign, and it was evil. And I can't go into a lot of details about this, but I wore it a lot. Okay, and it's done me no good.
Right.
None whatsoever. I mean, I'll give you one example what it's done to me. You remember in Lord of the Rings that the big thing was about the more you put the ring in, the more it takes over you, right?
Yes.
And then what it actually does, and I know because I've had it on, but remember its main component is copper. So what happens is when you put it on your finger, you get that green tinge. You know what copper does? It does that green tinge.
Yes.
That infuses the spell inside you.
Yes.
Right? So what I've had ever since, and it's constant, and there's a lot of other things that affected me with it. It nearly killed me, okay, from a physical point of view too. But one of the things it's done is that every minute of the day, I have a voice. I've got 2 voices inside my head, my voice and another voice. My other voice will tell me to do the most horrific things and tells it so often. And people have asked, what is it? I say, I can't tell you. It is so disgusting that I never tell anyone what's going on inside my head. And it never
So this
stops.
thing's brought a demon in.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, yes.
Yeah. It's a negative energy. It's got its own entity about it. And primarily, it tells you to do, like you've seen Lord of the Rings, and it whispers in their ears and always tells them. It never stops and never will. If I'm talking to anyone, this ring will tell me disgusting things about that person, or tell them to go away. It'll always do a commentary. I've been given advice by some elders that said those thoughts will stay with you for lifetimes. You can't get rid of it. What I can do, and that's the story with this, what I can do is I can disseminate the difference between.
And you can starve it out as well by basically not responding to it, cutting it off, and then saying that's a lie.
I can't turn it off.
Yeah.
I've tried that. I can't turn it off. But what I can do is just not do it, because I know what did it. Okay. I'm aware of what did it. It gives me most people wouldn't. Okay. And I'll give you an example of what happened with the second ring in a second. But I know what's causing it. And I know it's not me doing that. And I can disseminate the two, because I don't think like that. I never do. The thoughts I've had in my head constantly never stops, beyond belief. And I know the difference. I'm going to be honest, and since we are being honest about this, the only way I can sleep, because if I don't do this, I can never sleep, because they never shut up. If I go and if I smoke some dope before I go to sleep, right, I shut it up. And when I do that every night. I don't smoke during the day. I smoke after tea. I won't smoke yet. I do that because that's the only way I could sleep. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be talking to you now. It would have done me in, because I couldn't sleep. When I don't have the smoke, I will not sleep all night. The voices will never stop. And that's the way you can stop that. But that only works for the ring. I'm not suggesting other people who have schizophrenia use that. But in my case,
it's basically, I think, over the years, when I was talking to Jerry and also Sherry Swiney about this, she had an invasion of voices when she was very young, and she invented a thing called the "That's a Lie" program. In other words, whenever the voices come and you say "That's a lie," that's a lie. And I got out of somebody I know was in big trouble once, and they were going to do something very dangerous, and that worked. But that was a very extreme situation. So that's fascinating and quite disturbing. But I think it's a good warning to people as well, because these things are out there, and people who accept them wholeheartedly and start channeling them can cause a lot of trouble, not just for themselves, but for people around them, as you've just described.
Yeah, look, they're real. I mean, there's two parts to these rings. I mean, I've proved that they're on a technological viewpoint, and there's no one who can argue this with me, that they come from very, very sophisticated times, and they're ancient. But you've got to remember, yes, this guy, the people who made these rings were par excellence knowledge of chemistry, but they also had knowledge of alchemy, and they had knowledge of magic. And they were put into these three rings. Tolkien's story is primarily correct in most, but not all of what he said, but the great majority of it, because myths and legends obviously change over a period of time, and some things get lost. The second ring we got, the one from Scotland, was the most powerful of the three and the most evil. And it was
that's really interesting, Stephen, because Scotland does hold the key to a lot of world history from the research I'm doing.
Yes, it does, because that was the one that was evil. The other two weren't.
Yes, right. That's fascinating, Stephen. Very fascinating.
Yeah, well, that one was interesting. When I got that one, Ross sent it down to me and said it wants to be with you. And I thought, oh no. I thought, I'm having enough trouble with the first one, and you're sending me a second one. And then I got another one later. Oh God. And that one I still got. This one was worse. I didn't know at the time, and I wore this everywhere, because I thought I could clean it, and I couldn't. I mean, I tried everything, and someone said to me once, yeah, you've cleaned it a bit, another 2,000 years and it might be ready, but you won't have that much time. It's funny, on the very first day I brought it home, I put it on the table there, and my wife and Evan both came up to me and said, the ringers called me and asked me to put it wrong on the finger. And I looked at both of them and said, after all the rocks and the other ring I've got, why would you even ask to put it on your finger? And they said, it's called me. And then I asked, and this is my guidance ring, this one here that comes from Lemuria. I've got a crystal I can put over and ask a question. It'll always give me yes or no, and it's never been wrong. And I asked that ring if the other ring had spoken to both my wife and my son. It said yes. Then I asked it said, would it kill them? And I asked this thing, and it said yes. Then I asked the ring with the same crystal. It said, yeah, I'm going to kill them both. Now, it had only just come home, and I wanted to kill my wife and my son. And about a month later, it tried to kill me when I was driving a car. I thought I was going to have basically a stroke, because all of a sudden my leg locked up and it was in agony. It was like the vein there had been completely blocked, and I couldn't drive the car anymore. And I had the ring on at the time when I was driving. And I said to Evan, because we're driving a long distance, I can't drive anymore, mate. My leg's in a bad way here. And when I sat in the back seat, I looked at the ring and thought, hang on for a sec. As I took it off, that pain went and never came back. It was trying to kill me then. It was trying to kill me while I was driving the car. And then obviously I would have had an accident and killed my wife and my son as well. And that's what it's trying to do. And the whole time I had that ring, that's all it wanted to do. I had two psychics who actually put the ring in their palm of their hand there, two that I use, because I do use psychics when I go on the country, because I understand there's two sides to everything. And the first one collapsed and started vomiting. And the second one, after she said it's just, and they both told me the same story, it's just a massive black all over it. And they said the first one told me that it killed 500,000 people during its lifetime. The first one said it killed 5,000 people in its first person that wore it. And it's basically a killing ring. That's all it does. And that particular ring caused untold problems with so many people. And in the end, it was quite interesting. I was given, this is an interesting story too. I know we're nearly out of time, but I would like to finish for this one.
Carry on,
when
Stephen.
I destroyed it, when I actually destroyed it, I know this sounds like Lord of the Rings. I didn't have a volcano to throw the damn thing in, but I won't go into details, but it was cut up into many pieces, and buried over a long period, a large area, and no one's ever going to find it again. And I was told when I did that both my wife, Evan, and Leo, who were at the farm at the time, had to leave the farm. They could not be there because the energy inside it would have inhabited them, and it would have lived, and it would have taken over one of them. And I had to make sure they were at least 30 kilometers away, and they both rang me. Okay. And I was wearing all these other rings and protection. I had some spirits who were supposed to be looking after me. And I was told that if they're in the car when this happened, they'd crash and die. They had to be parked somewhere. Okay. So we did all that. And then I started. And by the way, when I cut it the first time, I can tell you, I wasn't happy. I can tell you that for sure, man. It was not good. And I'm thinking, I don't know how this is going to work out for me. It didn't work out particularly well. I nearly died after. We won't go into that story today. Even though those beings tried to protect me, the power of this was so great. But I want to explain something that happened that gives you an idea of how great the power was, the residual power. Okay, so I did that, buried it very deep, all over the place. Spent a lot of time doing that, a couple of hours. Then I rang my wife and I rang Evan and Leo and said, no, you can come back. Now, Evan and Leo went to Byron Bay, which is about 20 minutes drive. And they drove back. But as they drove back, they were driving the car, and it was at night time, and they're on the main highway. And in Australia at the night time, you don't drive your cars there because the trucks own it. Because Australia's a big place, and trucks just go everywhere, man, and they're in a hurry. And all of a sudden, he's driving his car, and it just stopped. The lights went, and everything went out. The lights went out, the whole thing. And this semi-trailer from behind nearly ran right up the back of him, took him out and veered around, slammed on the horn a few times, and then he rolled to a stop and veered off the side of the road. And he thought, never happened before. Didn't know what was going on. By the way, he still got the same car. And then after about 10 minutes, they turned it over and it started again. They started to drive and then accelerated. And then when they went past about 80, it just stopped again. another semi-trailer from behind, because the problem is it stops and the lights go out. So you can't even see it, right? And the semi was behind him at the time. Same thing again, veered around, nearly took him out. And finally, he pulled over on the side and he thought to himself, what am I going to do? And then he worked out something. Hang on, that time when I got to 80, it kicked out. So he drove the whole way on the highway for a while at 60 k's an hour, which didn't go down well with the trucks at all, and then came home. And you know what? Never happened again. After that, never happened again. That was the residual power of that ring was so powerful that even though it was destroyed, it could still reach out to my son and Leah, who I work with. And my wife, well, she came a different way, and she came later, a bit further on. And by that time, it had obviously basically died out. But soon after, I got very, very sick. And if it wasn't for the fact I was taken by a shaman and given healing that he said he's never given to anyone before, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I was on the way out. So, yes, I can talk about these rings from 2 points of view, which is number one, from a scientific viewpoint, I can win that case easily. I can't win the other case, but I can tell you now, there's not a word I told you there that isn't true. All of these things happen. And what Tolkien was talking about, he's talking about the time. He was actually talking about Atlantis. Okay, they called it something different, but this was a time when Atlantis was an autocratic, vicious power that was dominating, and it was warlike, and they'd lost all their soul. To begin with, Atlantis was meant to be heaven on earth. And in the end, it was hell on earth. And these rings come from hell on earth. Now, the third ring I kept. And I'm glad I did from an archaeological viewpoint. I wanted to keep one. And the beauty of that, the last one is it only affects you if you put it on your finger. And I've only worn it once. And that ring is fascinating because it's only got one job. I've only done this ceremony once. When you wear this ring, and I was told in advance what it does, it takes you to hell. And sometimes you come back and sometimes you die. That's its only purpose. I've only worn it once because I had to do that ceremony. And I survived that one. It wasn't as bad as the other two, but it wasn't pleasant. Hell's a horrible place. Do you know where it's found, mate? Inside yourself. It's your soul. Yeah. Your soul is a repository of everything you've ever done. And when you go to hell, all you ever see is your mistakes. And I got to tell you, mate, I got a lot. And it was just really.
Well, we've all made a lot of mistakes. That's really fascinating, Stephen. And I'm sorry to hear about all your troubles there, because I know that you've had the media attacking you for years, and now this. But that's fascinating. Can I just clarify something? So 2 of those rings were from Angkor Wat, and the third was from Scotland. Is that right?
Yes. That the most powerful ring of the 3. The first one I thought was the most powerful, but it wasn't.
Yes.
The third one is just a toy. You put it on your finger and you go to hell. Okay, simple as that's its job. But the second one, the one that was never cut, and it only has one symbol on it. The other ones have Atlantis and Atlas. This one just has Atlas, okay, alone. Now, people have got to understand something about Atlas. You remember the statue of Atlas holding the world on his shoulders?
Yes.
That was a punishment because he led an insurrection in the temple. He rose against Atlantis when it's at its best. He was not a good soul. And I didn't understand that. That's why it wasn't cut, because that was the evil ring. He was the one. He was punished. They were saying, what you've done now, you now carry the weight of the world on your shoulders for what you've done. Now, that ring, the one from Scotland, the most dangerous of the 3, was buried. And as I said, I'll try and find out for us, because Ros bought these rings. And I'll
be very fascinated, Stephen, because I'm doing some research on this subject of ancient Scotland and this cataclysm that happened and spread out from the British Isles. But that is very fascinating, and a very well-researched person I know many years ago who was trained all his life in really the machinations of what became eventually the Catholic Church, was telling me that Scotland was the place that had the key to many of the secrets that we're talking about here.
Well, there's one of them. There's one of them. And remember, they chose Australia and Scotland they chose them, and I was told the reason they chose Australia is because the original people gave them permission, and they guarded it, and they would make sure that no one would go near it. And they went to Scotland, the most powerful ring, and that only tells me one thing: there must be an incredible power within that area for it to be placed there. They went to the two places they thought were the safest on this planet. They took two to one place and one to Scotland. And of course, the Scottish one, I mean, those two, well, the third one is just a nuisance, really, by comparison to the first one. And the first one is really bad, but it's not as bad as the second one. And they buried it in Scotland because there must be something in there that is incredibly powerful and positive. It's positive. That's why it was put there. It wasn't put there because it was a negative place, because it had been in a negative place, and it had caused basically nearly the destruction of half of the planet. So therefore, they had to put it somewhere that had an incredible positive energy that could balance that out. And again, I think this one was picked up by a metal detector again. But you know what I find fascinating about this, Mark? Is all these rings have been found in the last 5-10 years. And I believe the reason why the Atlantean rings were found now is because they sensed what this place was like and thought, hello, it's back. I know this place. We were here before. This is what we created earlier. And there's a great saying that I think I'd like to sort of close with. It's a very good one. And it's this. Somebody said once, they said, with Atlantis, look, but don't stare. Because really, you've got to remember how it finished. I know how it started, but it died on its own sword because they were disgusting in the finish. And it's been made clear to me time after time by people that they fell into a pit, an abyss, and they couldn't get out. And they were basically, and these three rings, what they did is they fed on that. And then I know at one stage in the end, the rings were being passed around. The story is it was a magi, a keeper of the rings, that gave it to these bad people. And then that started a process. And that process saw the whole of Atlantis fall apart. So that's what the Younger Dryas, from my point of view, was about. It's about the rings doing their business, and they've sat waiting 12,000 years, and all of a sudden, and by the way, the stories, if you hear the stories of the two people who found these rings with their metal detector, they both started with, you're not going to believe this story. I thought, yeah, I will. Once you tell me that fits in with what these things are like. So yeah, it's an ongoing story.
Wow. That's quite a revelation, Stephen. It always is when we speak, and we haven't spoken for quite some time. So I have no idea all that's been going on.
This time.
No.
Well, I think do that next time, Mark. Yeah. We'll do
definitely.
That next time.
These shows are so fascinating, and more people should be watching and listening to what you're saying. And they seem to go with the trends. It's like a fashion, isn't it, Stephen? People go with fashion. They're not actually focusing on the unknown, which is really interesting. This is what I've found over the past few years. I don't know whether you found it, but the stuff that you've found over the years is absolutely mind-blowing. The artifacts that have come out of Australia are completely mind-blowing. And people still, they seem to congregate around the same issues. And we never do that on this show. And I know you don't do it either. So that's great.
That's why we keep doing what we're doing, because we don't have a choice, do we, Mark?
Yes. I really look forward to the next time, Stephen. That was absolutely fascinating. So remember that the website is here, forgottenorigin.com. That's Stephen and Evan Strong. Look up their stuff and you'll find a wealth of information on their website. So thanks a lot, Stephen. And
my pleasure.
Until next time, that was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you for asking this, mate.